Welcome. Thank you for watching this teaching video from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. Please check out our other videos and don't forget to like and subscribe. Our mission is to help people come to know Jesus better and love Him more every day. We believe this will not only help our own spiritual growth, but also help us better influence the community and the world for Christ. For more information about Oak Tree, please visit us at oaktreechurch.com. There you'll find past message series, online giving options, and more information about our discipleship process that we call The Path. Now enjoy this message. We'd love to hear from you in the comments or the website contact form. Thank you.
Good morning, Oak Tree Community Church. For those that don't know me, my name is Matt Sorenson. I'm one of the teachers in the teaching team here at Oak Tree Church. And welcome to everybody that's here. Welcome if you're online. Thank you for joining us. Like Gary said, you have lots of options, and we're glad you chose us. So thank you for being here. All right, so we've been going through these three big questions for the church. What are we supposed to be? What are we supposed to do? And how are we supposed to do it? We've been working through these this year. In the beginning of the year, we looked at what the church is supposed to be, and we used some illustrations like the vine and the branches, the cornerstone and building, the good shepherd, and the head and body. We looked at those. We moved on to what's the church supposed to do, and in that we looked at the 5 different purposes of the church, which are worship, fellowship, discipleship, evangelism, and ministry. And now we're making our way through is how the church is supposed to do it. So far, we've looked at our church structure. We've looked at elders and deacons and members. And now we're talking about actual ministry, getting into it and actually doing some real things in ministry opportunities. So this week, we're going to tackle the subject of ministry and marriage. We're going to look at some guidelines, try and set ourselves up to create a ministry that we can share with our spouse and be able to, do ministry within our marriage. I'm going to talk about, setting up some expectations and some boundaries and, just try and think about how we want to do this with our spouse. How do we want to do ministry with them? We're also going to talk about some of the challenges that you end up with, trying to do ministry with your spouse in ministry. And we're also going to look at some practical examples and some information and see how that's supposed to look in our marriages. So now this is a message on marriage and ministry. So before I get too much further, I just want to say, yes, some people here are not married, and that's okay. The goal is not to, not include you in this. The thing is that most of what we teach about ministry does apply to you. So, there are things here that you can actually, get good information out of. But there's also people in your life that are married themselves. So if you pay attention and you get some of this information, you can share it with people that that are married. And also, if you're looking to get married in the future, this is a good time now to think about stuff like this instead of waiting until you actually are married. So with that said, let's go ahead and let's dive into talking about marriage and ministry. Okay, so at this point, I want to acknowledge there's probably like 4 different states that you can end up with, when you get married. First is I was participating in ministry before we got married, and now I would like my spouse to participate with me. I am married, and I would like to get started in ministry with my spouse. Number 3, I was participating in ministry before we got married, and my spouse is not interested in participating in my ministry. And 4, I was not in ministry before we were married. I want to start now, but my spouse has no interest in the ministry I am interested in. So to kind of start the message off, I want to tackle states 1 and 2 first, kind of look at those and talk about some practical ways. And then we'll kind of come back to states 3 and 4 and we'll talk about those as well. But first, let's talk about ministry together. So if you were in ministry before you were married, and now you want your spouse to participate in ministry with you, it's a really good thing. Finding ways to serve together with your spouse is actually a really good thing. It creates all kinds of wonderful memories. It gives you things to look back on, as you serve together in ministry. Um, Especially when you're looking back on your life. I mean, obviously I'm a little older. So when I'm looking back on my life, I can think of things, times that, Karen and I were in ministry together. And it's really good to think about that, and have those experiences and have those memories with me. Um, Another great thing is when you're doing ministry together, especially if you find a ministry that you really want to do together, you can kind of do it as your thing. It's your thing that you can actually do together, and enjoy, having your spouse doing it with you, and it helps create stronger bonds because you're doing something together that's useful, that is also helpful. And so, like, if you're trying to get into ministry with your spouse, it's probably a good way to kind of start the conversation, is some of the things that you get out of it, the positives and stuff that you get from it. So when you're at this stage, one thing you have to do is have an open and honest conversation about the ministry you're already in with the one you'd like to join, okay? Or the one you'd like to join. So you want to see what your spouse thinks about it. What do they think? Do they want to join in ministry with you? I mean, are they, what do they have in their mind? Don't be surprised if they say, well, what you're doing is not really something I want to do. I mean, there's lots of different reasons. It could be like, just they don't feel like they fit in. It might be, more than they want to get involved in. It just might be something that, they don't feel like they're gifted in. So it's something that you really have to have like an honest conversation with your spouse over. And at this point, you got to kind of make a decision, because if your spouse wants to try something different, what are you going to do? Do you want to stay where you're at and keep doing what you're doing, keep doing what you're comfortable with? Or do you want to try something new? And so it's a tough decision. I mean, it's a decision only you can make. I mean, you're the only person that can make that decision, but it's something you really should think about. Me personally, I would think that it's better if your spouse is really wanting or gravitating towards a different ministry than you're in. I personally think it's something that you should think about, and you should think, well, you know what, maybe I'll try something different. Okay. The reason is unless you're doing something that's really, like really unique to you, or you're really having a real powerful impact in ministry, if you leave that one and try a different one, you're still making an impact. You're still making a difference in the lives of Christians around you. You're just making an impact in a different place. The other main reason I say that is because once you're married, your relationship with God still is first, but once you're married, your spouse now becomes your number one ministry responsibility. You are to minister to your spouse. You're to take care of your spouse. You're to watch over your spouse, okay? That's what your responsibility is once you get married. So you still want to develop and your relationship with God always comes first. But before ministry, before you help the world, your spouse comes first, and then your family, and then the rest of the world. So it's good if you can get into a ministry with your spouse and actually be able to do these things and build these memories, and you have something to look back on, and for the rest of your life. There we go. So let's say once you've made that decision to start out in ministry together, what's the next conversation you need to have? Well, what are your expectations and what are your spouse's expectations? Because if you're going to start out in ministry, you're going to want to try and start out on the same page. What do you want to do? I mean, are you looking to be a helper at someone's ministry? Do you want to be a leader in someone's ministry? Do you want to start your own ministry? Are you looking for this to be like a lifetime, commitment where I'm actually going to get into full-time ministry? These are expectations you've got to kind of come up with. You got to kind of, work out with your spouse. The difference here being that, when you're single, you get to do it by yourself. But now when you're married, you've got to kind of hash this out with your spouse, because they have expectations, they have thoughts, they have ideas, they have thoughts of where things are going to go too. And so you can't just assume, okay, well, because I want to do this, that my spouse is going to want to do this with me. Now, before I get too much further, probably I should say this is, hopefully, before you got married, you've been having some of these conversations with your spouse, okay, that you've talked about, if you want to do ministry, if you want to do things in the church, that you've actually talked to them, and this isn't like a surprise. You don't want to wait till the day that you say, I do, and then go, dear, it's always been a dream of mine to be in full-time ministry. That's a bad time to bring it up, okay? It's a good time to bring it up before you get married and work it out then. Because if you bring it up afterwards, your dream might just end up staying a dream, because you still have to work together with your spouse. You still have to work out things and your team. So have these discussions early and often, because that way then you aren't disappointed later on down the road. Now, if this is something that came up after you got married as an idea, it's understandable. You didn't talk about it beforehand. I mean, it happens to everybody. We think about things and then we don't, really discuss them with people. That's okay. When you bring it up with your spouse afterwards, if you've been married for a little while and your spouse isn't super enthused about it, that's something you're going to have to be, you're going to have to be cognizant of. You're going to have to, realize, okay, look, maybe this wasn't on their radar. Maybe this is not something that they were really thinking about, but it's something you can still work through. The best thing with marriages is to have long, open, honest conversations. That works out the best usually, because, at least you can kind of talk about, what you're feeling, what you're thinking. And, you can kind of go back and forth and say, okay, what do you expect? What do I expect? What do we want? But it gets a little complicated because, again, like I said, you have two people working at this. So once you kind of iron out your expectations, like, okay, well, we're gonna help in the children's ministry, or we're gonna go lead a Bible study, or we're gonna do something. The next area of agreement in ministry is you're gonna have to figure out your time spent. Okay? You're gonna have to figure out together how much time do you really want to spend in ministry? How much time do you have to spend in ministry? I'd like to bring up Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, okay? Paul makes the case that if possible, people should stay single, okay? He makes that case because in his mind, it's like single people have way more time in order to devote to ministry. They have way more time to devote to these things. They're more concerned with the things of God rather than the things of each other. He does make a case. He says, hey, don't get married. But he does tell people, it's like, hey, look, if you can't stay married, it's better to get married than to burn with lust. It's better to just get married and then, if that's what you want. But he lays out his points in verses 32 to 35 of chapter 7, where he mentions that those who are single have more time to serve the Lord. Starting with verse 32. And I want you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the things of the world, how to please his wife. And he's divided. An unmarried woman or a virgin is concerned about the things of the Lord, to be holy in body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the things of the world, how to please her husband. I'm saying this for your benefit, not to place a limitation on you, but so without distraction you may give notable and constant service to the Lord. So Paul here is saying, part of the problem with being married is we're concerned about taking care of our spouse, which we're supposed to. That they're our number one ministry priority at that point. And so because of that, we don't have as much time to devote into ministry as someone who's single. We're worried about the things that they're worried about. We want to please them. We want to make sure that, we provide the things that they need, but we also want things from them. We want them to spend time with us. We want to be able to do things together, spend time on vacations and other things together as a married couple. So where single people by default have a little bit more time and they're more, they have more flexibility. Once you get married, it's like you kind of expend more time trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? You have to work, you have to work it out and come to a consensus on how much time you really have in order to work in ministry. So if you want to spend a lot of time in ministry, but your spouse isn't keen on the idea, you're going to have to negotiate out what works best for both of you. Okay, you're going to have to negotiate and say, okay, what can we do? What's really right for our marriage? But again, you're gonna have to kind of come up with a consensus, because you don't want to press and say, okay, this is what I think we should do, and then your spouse is like, no, this is not really what I wanted to do. You really want to come up with that, that decision, mutual decision together, because then in going forth in ministry, your spouse is actually going to enjoy doing it with you and not be like resentful because, oh, okay, now again, we have to go and do this, or, again, we're going to go do that. The great thing about doing ministry together is you're not sacrificing your together time, okay? That's what's really cool. It's like you can actually do ministry together and still have time together, which a lot of couples like. I like to, spend time with my wife and doing things, but you can do that while you're doing ministry. You don't have to sacrifice that time. And the thing is, when you're doing ministry together, hopefully it's more fun because you've married somebody that you really like. You enjoy being with them. Okay, so why not be, doing ministry with them? Because you enjoy them and you actually have fun being around them. So once you kind of work out your time, once you've thought, okay, this is the time that we can do, okay, there's one more thing that you're going to have to figure out. This is where things get really sensitive, and that's money. So for most couples, money is always a sensitive issue. There's just only ever enough money, and there's just never excess. Well, I haven't experienced it. If you've experienced it, I'd like to know what it's like. But anyways, so the thing is that there's always bills fighting for your money. There's always things fighting for your money. There's things that have to be done in order to maintain your home, your car, your lifestyle. So there's never a shortage of things that want your money. So it can kind of be a kind of tricky subject to discuss, because it's like, okay, what one person expects, what we're going to do with the money, and the other person, again, it's going to be really hard. You have to have these long, open, honest conversations. You probably won't solve it in the first conversation that you have. You might have to have multiple iterations of conversations and saying, okay, maybe this is what we should do. Maybe this is, how we should do this. The thing is, though, fortunately, a lot of ministry work that you do doesn't require a lot of money. There are some that do, but not every ministry that you participate in will need money. So maybe sometimes that's things to kind of gravitate for. But what you want to do is you want to be prepared for the ones that actually do require more of a cash outlay. Ministries that, in order for them to function, they do need money. This is especially true if one spouse is more tied to the ministry than the other spouse. If one spouse is more connected in with this ministry, then the problem is going to be like one spouse is going to want us to give more money, the other one's going to not want to. I thought of a recent example. Karen and I had recently attended a fundraiser for the Women's Care Center in Michigan City. It's a great center. They do a lot of really good work with women. They help them with things like ultrasounds, diapers, counseling, and support. We went to a fundraiser for them. They help vulnerable mothers who are in a terrible situation where they may not have anyone with them. They may be alone. They may not have enough money to support their children. They're just in a bad, abusive relationship. So they help them get through that. And they help them make a decision where abortion might have been a really viable option for them. They help them to make the decision to keep their baby. The problem is, though, these centers aren't cheap, okay? Things like ultrasounds, diapers, they're expensive, okay? So even if they were able to get all of the volunteers, all kinds of people showed up and they're all willing to help, and, you've got people stacked on people that, okay, everyone can do something. The problem is they still need money. There's still things that need to be paid for. So a lot of the volunteers can, as they're serving, can actually feel, the need of the ministry and be like, okay, I can see that they really need money. The things need to be repaired, things need to be upkept. There's more women here than they thought that were going to happen this year. So at some point, you're going to feel a deep desire to want to give, okay? But as a couple, you got to kind of work through that, all right? So how do you navigate that? Well, let's talk about that, okay? I personally am not a financial expert, but there's some real practical ways that you can work this out with your spouse, okay? And you can have a good, healthy approach to giving in ministry. So the first best thing to do is to write down what your finances are. How much money do you actually have coming in? How much money do you have coming in, and how much money do you have going out, okay? So the reason you do this is because if you don't even know what you have coming in and you don't even know what you have coming out, how do you know what you can give? I mean, sacrificially, or just even, hey, we have this excess money, we can give this. So if you don't even know what you're doing, it's going to be really hard for you to navigate that. In the 80s, I learned from G.I. Joe that knowing is half the battle. So you got to know what your finances are like before you can actually do anything. So once you kind of understand and have an understanding of what's going on and work it out together, my wife pays most of the bills. So if somebody was to ask me, hey, do we have extra money? Sure, I think we do. I won't really know until I talk to her. Then we would have to sit down and we'd have to hash it out. So it's like everyone does something a little different in their marriage, but you gotta work it out. You gotta sit down and talk about it. So once you understand that, okay, this is what we have to give, this is what we can do, okay? At this point, you want to decide, okay, how much money do we really want to donate, okay? When you make this decision, you want to make this decision someplace quiet or at home. If you have children, try doing it when the children aren't around so you can actually just have a conversation with each other. You want to have some sort of a game plan, okay? You want to make a decision together, okay? And you want to avoid manipulation. You want to avoid, I really want to do this. You have to avoid the strong arming tactics because again, like, hey, we can do this, we have the time. If you're saying, hey, we can do this, we have the money, the other partner may not feel that way, okay? And you don't want to shut them down. You don't want to make the decision for them because then they become resentful, and you don't want that in your marriage because it poisons everything. And resentment builds pretty quickly. So when you make these decisions, you really want to make sure you make them together. You don't want to create a new hardship for yourself. Really, the big reason why you want to come up with a plan before you go to a fundraiser or something, okay, is it always comes up. Every organization, even the church, needs money, okay? We couldn't keep the doors open if we couldn't pay for the lights and other stuff. It's just how things work, okay? So the thing is that every organization at some point is going to come to you and go, hey, we need your help. Can you give? Can you give to us? The problem is that what you want to do is you want to be prepared before you go to a fundraiser and then you see all the emotional videos and the tearjerker moments and, if I could really help them. The reason is because the spouse that's more invested in it, they're going to cave. They're going to give in. They're like, yeah, we're going to give big. And the other spouse is like, no, we're not. Okay. And again, that's just going to create more friction and tension in your marriage. So what you want to do is you want to make that mutual decision long before you ever get there, okay? I'm not saying it's wrong to give sacrificially. It's good to give sacrificially. God gives us these resources. He gives us time and money. We should be willing to sacrifice something, okay? Especially for good organizations, especially for people that are doing, good things. But the thing is you don't want to go in there and then, just be like, okay, I have no plan, and okay, I'm just gonna fall for this. If you're giving in the moment, it feels good in the moment, but after the moment, the money's gone. Okay. And if it was more than you could afford, it's gone. Um, and that's the thing you need to realize, or that's the thing that I'm trying to reiterate. All the emotional pleas and stuff and giving in the moment, it's a terrible way to manage your resources. You really want to manage your resources better than that, because once the money's gone, it's gone. Like time, you really can't. Well, I mean, you can work more hours and stuff, but then you're giving up time, you're sacrificing. So another thing that the married couples need to take into account when they're talking about doing ministry is the season of life that they're in. Okay, so when you're considering getting into ministry with your spouse, think about what season of life you're in right now. Okay, when you're young and just starting out, okay, you don't got any much money. I mean, we didn't. Okay, we were younger, and we didn't have money, but that's okay because we had some time and we could manage and donate our time, because that was the season of life that we were in. When kids start to show up, now all of a sudden you have to step back and you have to have an honest conversation with your spouse and be like, okay, now we're starting to have children. Now money's starting to get tight, or money was tight, and now time is starting to get tight because now we have to raise the kids. So at that point, you have to have that conversation again with your spouse and be like, okay, what really should we be doing? How much ministry can we really do? And there's no shame in stepping back. Okay, if you have to step back, if you don't have those resources to give, there's no shame in pulling back, for a time when you have to do things. Just be smart and savvy about what you have. Another thing too is as the kids start to grow, okay, even though you're not really getting money back, you're starting to get a little bit of time back, and you can actually involve the kids in ministry. So you can actually take the kids out and say, okay, this is how ministry is done. Let me show you, these are things. This is how you serve people. Try and build that lifelong desire within them to actually help people, to do ministry, to make God happy. And then as your kids start to grow up and as they start to get into ministry themselves, they start to get into high school, at that point, they're starting to be mini adults. At that point, they start to move on, and now you're kind of an empty nester. So now, you have more money and you have more time, or more money and more time probably than you've had previously. So now it's time to reevaluate again and have the conversation. What kind of ministry can we do? How can we get into ministry again? How can we do things for other people? And because it's really important. I mean, like the things that we do to help people, they do actually help people. I mean, when you do ministry, it really does affect other people. So I've talked a little bit about if your spouse wants to do ministry with you. What happens if you want to do ministry, but your spouse doesn't want to do ministry with you, or they want to do something that you really don't want to do? Well, then you kind of find yourself, sorry, wrong slide. You find yourself in state 3 or 4, where I was participating in ministry before. We got married and my spouse is not interested in participating in my ministry, or I was not in ministry before we were married. I want to start now, but my spouse has no interest in the ministry I'm interested in. So what are some ways you can kind of navigate this? What are some ways that you can kind of work through this? So let's look at some practical examples. Earlier I covered, if you're in a ministry and your spouse doesn't want to be in that ministry, again, think about, hey, maybe it's time to switch. Maybe you should try something different. You never know what you're good at until you at least try. Try it out, see what you like, see what you don't, see if you can find some place that you fit in that you can do ministry with your spouse. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, if you really don't like it, you can always go back. You can always say, you know what, I really tried, I really put effort. I just don't like doing that, okay? Not everyone's, built to have little kids and do a small kids group, okay? That's just not how everyone's programmed. So not everyone's going to want to do that. But if you don't try, you don't know if you ever were any good at it. But if you do end up on different ministry teams, there are some simple ways that you can actually stay connected with your spouse, even though you're doing ministry separately. Okay. Probably the most powerful thing that you can do is ask your spouse to pray for you and your ministry, as you're doing it. Okay. Ask them when they spend their alone time with God, when you're in prayer, can you please pray for me and pray for my ministry and the things that I'm doing? And be specific. Don't just ask for, oh, I need general blessings. It's like, because then it's just like, oh, God, help them. And then they move on. Okay. You want to be specific. And the reason is because that builds connection, because then they realize, okay, these are the things that are important to my spouse. This is the things that my spouse is going through. Then they can connect with God and they can pray for you. It's like, so be specific and ask your spouse, hey, what are things that I can pray for you? And even beyond ministry, if there's things, like just every day, how can I pray for you? And, just be specific and say, okay, these are the things that I'm struggling with, and then work together as a team, because that's what you are. When you're married, you're a team. So along with praying for each other, another thing you want to do is you want to speak encouragement into your spouse's ministry. Okay. The things that they're doing separately from you. Okay. You want to speak encouragement into them and say, hey, I think you're doing a really good job. I think it's wonderful that you know what you're doing. It sounds like you're really making a difference. Great job on the wins that you've had. You want to speak that encouragement because it also helps them understand that, okay, they care about me, and hopefully they're doing the same for you. They're speaking encouragement into your life and engaging with you. Another thing to remember is that men and women see things differently. When I'm talking about, ministry, I keep saying spouse because, I'm the husband, my wife. You might be the wife and the husband. So, but basically men and women see everything differently. Okay. And that's okay. That's a good thing. Okay. It's good that we don't see things the same, because the nice thing about your spouse is they can see your blind spots, things that you can't see. Okay. They can see those things. And when you talk to them, they can see the things that you're missing. So what you want to do is you want to ask them for their advice, ask them for their counsel. Okay. Don't be afraid to ask them their opinion. See what they think. See what they, what they're, see what they think. See what, maybe you could be doing something a little bit differently. So it's very important to get that advice, because they can see things and they understand you. They know you better than than you realize. And they can see you in situations sometimes that you're like, well, that's not important. And they're like, no, dear, that's really important. You need to take care of that. So it's something that you want to get from your spouse. You want to listen to their counsel and reevaluate your ministry position as you go. Another thing too is that if they're looking and seeing, hey, you're kind of struggling, you're allowing your boundaries to be pushed. A lot of times your spouse will see that. You need to take that advice and you need to listen to that seriously, because, if you don't, you might get pushed around, and then you're not going to be in a place that you want to be, the place that you guys had mutually agreed, okay, this is what we're going to do in ministry. This is what we're going to do with our money. And the thing is, this is all very valuable. Being in ministry is very worthwhile and valuable. Okay. We can't pay God back for our salvation. It's impossible. All right. But we can at least show our appreciation to God by doing things for others. We can at least show our appreciation for the Lord by being involved in ministry and making an impact on the world. So another thing I wanted to cover is whether your spouse and you are serving together or separately. Okay, there eventually comes a time when ministry becomes a little too much for you. Maybe you're spending a little bit too much time in there. Maybe, you're really running into a lot of resistance and other things. Maybe there's a shortage of people engaged. There's all kinds of different things. Ministry is difficult. I mean, it's not easy. Okay, to get involved in ministry, it takes real work. If it was easy, there would be volunteers falling all over the place to be like, yeah, sure, I'll help out, no problem. There would never be people would be an endless resource. But it's work. It's actual work. It's actual work to go out and perform ministry. It's actual work to go and do things like the kids' vacation Bible adventure. okay? Because you actually have to show up. You have to actually spend time and effort doing it. So at some point, you might have to ask your spouse, you seem kind of, upset or down, or, you seem kind of stressed out. Maybe it's time for a break. Maybe that's the next conversation you need to have. It's like, hey, look, maybe it's time for you to take a little bit of a break and take some time off and think about it, because we don't want ministry to become just another thing we check off on our to-do list. Okay, you don't want it to just be like another task or another chore that you do, because are you really then actually affecting people if all you're doing is like, yep, I did ministry today, yep, I did that yesterday too, okay, now I've checked it off. Okay, you don't want it to become like that. So before that, you want to be able to look at your if you're getting burned out, hopefully your spouse helps you. If you're starting to get burned out, think about, okay, maybe it is time for a break. Okay, even Jesus took a break from time to time. Okay, even Jesus, the Son of God, had to take a break every once in a while. And I have 3 examples for you. The first one is from Mark, chapter 1, verse 35. It says, then Jesus got up early in the morning when it was still very dark, departed, and went out to a deserted place. There he spent time in prayer. And in Luke chapter 6, verse 12, now it was during this time that Jesus went out to the mountain to pray, and he spent all night in prayer to God. And again in Mark chapter 6, verses 31 to 32, he said to them, come with me privately to an isolated place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and there was no time to eat. So they went away by themselves in a boat to some remote place. So sometimes we have to be alone. We have to recharge. Sometimes it's good to sit on the sidelines for a little bit and just rest and relax. You can't be in the game 100% of the time, okay? No professional team does that. If they do, you burn your players out really quickly. So it's okay if you have to take a break. One thing I will say, though, is if you want to take a break, think about, okay, how long of a break do I want to take? Don't just be like, okay, well, I'm going to drop this for a little while, and I'll come back when I feel better, because that day may never come. So what you want to do is you want to think about, okay, how much of a break do I really need? How much of a break does my spouse really need? Maybe if you're in ministry together if you're in ministry together, and you're doing ministry together, maybe you could stagger your breaks, because sometimes if you need a break, maybe your spouse needs a break as well. So it's something to consider when you're thinking about taking a break. Maybe looking and seeing if somebody else can take your place. You don't want to just leave everybody, okay, high and dry, and okay, I've decided that, I need to walk away for a little while. You don't want to wait until it's an emergency before you decide, okay, it's time to take just a little bit of a time off. All right, so I want to change gears a little bit. All right, we've been talking about, working with your spouse in ministry, doing it as a couple, some expectations and boundaries and stuff. So what I want to talk about next is like an example of people doing ministry together. So in the Bible, we don't get like lots of specific examples. If we did, like if we had specific examples for everything in life, I mean, it would be a big book, okay? Because there's a lot of examples that we would like to have, okay? But the Bible gives us lots of general principles that we can use. We can figure out how the universe works because the Bible tells us that. It gives us these general principles that we can work with. But in this case, we do actually have an example. Aha. Somehow I skipped ahead. Okay, there we go. We do have a biblical example, okay? And that is Aquila and Priscilla, okay? They were a married couple that worked with Paul in ministry. So they're actually mentioned in the New Testament 4 different times, which is pretty good. I mean, that's pretty honorable mention there. We don't know a tremendous amount about them because they're just, some of the mentions are honorable mentions, like, hey, Paul says in 3 of his books to greet his fellow workers, and to that they are very important to him. Okay, but they are mentioned 3 separate times in Acts. Okay, the first is when Paul comes to Ephesus or Corinth. I'm sorry, he comes to Corinth and he meets them. Okay, and they're fellow tent makers, so they work together. And he stays with them while he's preaching in Corinth. When he leaves Corinth and goes to Ephesus, he takes them with them, and they go, and then they're working in the church. So when Paul departs to Caesarea, they're still there working away at Ephesus. The last mention that they have is in Acts chapter 18, and that's the one I want to kind of focus on. Now a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, arrived in Ephesus. He was an eloquent speaker, well versed in the scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and with great enthusiasm he spoke and taught accurately the facts about Jesus. Although he only knew the baptism of John, he began to speak out fearlessly in the synagogue. But when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained the way of God to him more accurately. So this new guy shows up in Ephesus, Apollos, okay? And he's a Jew from Alexandria, and he's talking about Jesus. And here Priscilla and Aquila hear him, and they're like, you've got most of the story, but you don't have it all. Let us help you out. So here this husband and wife team, they take their ministry very seriously. They take their ministry seriously enough to pull him aside, obviously a very eloquent speaker, and instruct him more fully on actually, the way, the ways of Jesus. Later on, he becomes a very prominent figure in the New Testament church. I mean, he goes on and he's going to preach all over that area, and he's going to be mentioned again, and he's faithfully serving. But he got his better start from them, this husband and wife team that actually took their ministry seriously, and they taught him and helped him to become a better speaker. Now, would somebody else stepped in and say and helped? I don't know. I cannot say, because all I can say is they were the first ones to step in and say, hey, look, let's help you out. Okay, they took their ministry seriously, and they worked together as a team. At one point, actually, Paul points out that they risked their lives to save him. Okay, and it was probably easier for them because they were working together as a team. They had each other to fall back on. They had each other to go through the obstacles that they were going through as a ministry team together. And so it's a thing that we should think about in ministry in our own family is, how do we want this in our marriage? How do we want this to look for us? So my main focus throughout the message has been talking about, doing ministry successfully. I wanted to put together some realistic things that you can do to work with your spouse and talk to them, and commit more to ministry. A lot of times when we start out in ministry, we don't really ask the questions. I mean, like when you get started, you don't always ask, how much time is this going to take? How much money is going to be required? You're kind of like, oh, this is great. I'm going to do this for a little while. And then as you get into it more, you start to realize things. So it's good to plan ahead of time. It's good to think about these things. There's an old saying that, in business, I've heard this phrase many, many times. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that's true even with ministry. If you're not planning on what you want to do, your expectations, your boundaries, you're going to just be doing whatever. You need to have some sort of a plan, especially if you're going to do a ministry with your spouse. So in closing, okay, what I'd like to do is I'd like to challenge you with 3 different things and ask you 3 different questions. And first is, have you thought about ministry with your spouse and some areas you would like to serve together? If not, pray about it. Think about it. What are some things that you can do together? I mean, what are some things that you both have interests in? I mean, your spouse. I mean, even if you just got married to them, you still know your spouse a little bit. Have that conversation with them. Hey, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? And, work it out. See what it is that, what they want to do. Because adding ministry into your marriage, it's a powerful thing. You create all kinds of good memories and things that you can look back on. Believe me, I know. I mean, Karen and I have done ministry before. We have things that we can look back on that we can remember. We went to Brazil together. I mean, we have that to share. It's really, really cool. It's something that you really want to have in your marriage. Think about your expectations for ministry. And what does that look like for you? And what does that look like for you in your marriage? Again, talk to your spouse. Say, hey, what do you want to do? Do we want to do ministry together? Do we want to do ministry separately? How can we help each other? How can we work with each other? And the last thing is, have you considered healthy boundaries on your money and time? Have you talked this over with your spouse? If not, it's really something you should talk about. Don't just assume, okay? Don't just assume that you know what's going on, because you probably don't. I mean, they have a completely different set of things that they're thinking about in their brain. So when you're considering time, take a little time too when you're considering how much time you really have, and think about how you're spending it. I've said this before, in messages past, but really, what are you really doing with your time? Okay. Is a lot of your time absorbed in free time? Are you, watching Netflix? You doom scrolling videos on your phone? Is this time that you could use effectively? Is this time that you could use to help other people? And the reason I say that, I'm not trying to hurt anyone's feelings, but the reason I say that is time is a resource. Once it's gone, it's gone. Okay. When your time is gone, you can't go backwards and say, well, I'm going to make a difference now, because once it's up, it's up. Okay.